Hello, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Diva Divine Light, and I hope everybody's doing well tonight. Well, this is a pre-recorded live. Please enjoy the show. We will be doing updates on Rkelly and his trial of 2021. They are soon coming to a close. Closing arguments will be coming soon, according to reports. The prosecution has about two more witnesses. Not the prosecution. The defense team has two more witnesses, allegedly, to come to the stand and testify in defense of Rkelly. But in the meantime, before we get into that, I would like us to listen to a poem about sexual abuse. And I stand with all victims, survivors of abuse. This is for you guys. May you ladies stay strong, hold your ground, and pray really hard that all of this wasn't for nothing and that justice will be served.
From the age of 12, we were told that if boys pulled our hair or poked us with pencils, it meant that they liked us. But we didn't like it that much. We were 13 years old when we would walk down the street and had men look. From the age of 12, we were told that if boys pulled our hair or poked us with pencils, it meant that they liked us. But we didn't like it that much. We were 13 years old when we would walk down the street and had men look from our feet to our face, and we'd listen as they completely replaced our identity from human to object. As they said cringeworthy things to us, we wanted to run. We were frozen in place but continued walking fast-paced, turning on whatever sidewalk was closest just to get away, even if it didn't lead us in the way that we were originally going. Because Mama always said, if you see a strange man following you, you go to the other side of the street. And remember, if they ever grab you, scream. And there's something we had to learn at the age of 13 because we are just young fiends. We were spanked by the boys at our school, but it was cool because it just meant we had nice bodies. And they rated our bodies on a scale from 1 to 10. And if you were a 10, you would learn to spend your days hearing whistles, purring, and damn girl. Because if you were a damn girl, then that meant you weren't a damn girl at all. You were just a toy labeled do whatever you want to me, even though I don't agree. And we had to watch what we wore because if too much shoulder was showing, we had to change our clothing because it distracted the boys from their learning. So the only thing that we were learning were tips and tricks to tie up our shirt so that it didn't hang too low, because that would show the guys that we wanted. Because wearing shorts and tank tops meant that we were flaunting it. So when we were 16, we screamed because the men that followed us on the sidewalks finally caught up to us. We quietly said, please don't touch us there. We know we're asking for it by wearing these heels, but we just feel so uncomfortable, so stop. But that meant go. We said no, but that meant yes, so they grabbed us and unzipped our dress. They threw us down where our dignity sank lower than the ground. They hovered over us and we pleaded for them to stop. They got on top, and you don't need to know the rest because we're some of the 60% of victims that will never tell a soul, so we'll just grab our dresses and go home, take a few showers, and try to get some sleep. In the morning, we will pick out the outfit that is most discreet because we want to make sure that no other man from the street thinks we look sweet enough to want to taste. We want to make sure we are as covered as possible so that our identities are not replaced with walking candy. And we will sit at the back of class where nobody will ask how our weekend was because if they ask, we might just burst into tears. And we will live in fear. We will run home so that we will never see the same men again that wait for us to be alone. We went from little boys poking us to men provoking us. We went from little boys pulling our ponytails to watching the trail of tears fall down our pillow every night because we knew once we fell asleep we would see the men in our dreams, nightmares that caught up to us on the sidewalk that night and left us bare. We went from playing with our toys to being toys ourselves. So boys will be boys, and us women will never tell. Thank you.
Now that the prosecution has rested its case, it's time for Rkelly's lawyers to lay out their defense. Now, 6 of the 11 accusers who testified said they were all underage when sexual encounters started with the superstar. Joining us now is Dr. Jeff Gardier, Associate Professor of Behavioral Medicine. He's here to talk about sexual assault and the re-traumatization of it. Dr. Gardier, it is always a pleasure to have you, sir. Let's just jump right in. Let's discuss the grooming of young victims by older men. How does that happen?
Well, it's something that happens way too often, Tashani, as we know in many of the cases that we've dealt with, and even in our communities. And it really is about targeting an individual and getting their confidence, not even coming off perhaps in a sexual manner to begin with, but getting them over time to be able to trust you and to convince them that you are in their corner, that you've got their back, that you are there for them in every way. And then once you get that confidence, then they go in for the kill with regard to then acting out sexually. And what we see is the sexual assaults, pedophilia, rape, and so on.
Dr. Gardier, I want to bring in our correspondent. He is outside of that courthouse where the Rkelly trial is taking place. Dre Clark, what's the latest? What happened today in court, sir?
Well, Tashani, today the defense called 2 more witnesses. Both are former employees of singer Rkelly, and they testified. They both spent a substantial amount of time with Kelly, and they never witnessed any forms of abuse. Now, the first person to testify this morning was James Meeks. He testified he worked for Rkelly for some 15 years, and he was first an unpaid intern starting in 2002. And over the years, he was promoted to various other positions. When he stopped working for Kelly in 2019, he was a sound engineer, and he's actually listed on the credits for several Rkelly songs. Now, Meeks told the jury he never witnessed any forms of abuse involving Kelly and his girlfriends. He said Kelly's girlfriends would come around and everything seemed normal to him. But under cross-examination, Meeks said he did have to sign a confidentiality agreement, so he couldn't really discuss a lot of things, and that he did stop working for Kelly from 2010 to 2014, so he could not speak to what Kelly was doing during the time he was not around. When asked if he wanted to see Kelly convicted, Meeks said no. Prosecutors pointed out that Meeks' livelihood financially has been tied to Kelly for years, so that's why he doesn't want to see a conviction. The second person to testify was a man by the name of John Holder. He was Kelly's former accountant and business manager. He said he worked for Kelly from 2018 to 2019, and that he also traveled with Kelly to different concert locations to make sure that he was being properly paid. Holder says Kelly would give his girlfriends cash money and allow them to buy whatever he wanted. He says he was with Kelly for hours at a time, almost 3 or 4 times a week. And again, that he never witnessed any abuse. He said the girlfriends would come around, they would speak to him, he would talk to them, and that he never saw any of them crying at any point in time. We should mention that the judge said today the defense plans to wrap up its case tomorrow with its last witness, and then there will be closing arguments, and eventually the jury will get the case, and we expect that should happen either late Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, and we could possibly have a verdict on Friday or sometime Monday or Tuesday. That's the latest here, Tashani.
You know, this is a very closely watched case, and we know you'll bring us the latest. Thank you. And we go back to our guest, Dr. Gardier, to talk about what we just heard. So, Dr. Gardier, before we went to that live report, we were talking about how this has taken place in our community. How much of this is young girls dating older men? Is it a cultural thing, or is it just teenage curiosity being exploited?
Well, I think, Tashani, we have to be real careful in the language that we use around these sorts of issues, because these young girls, as you said, are convinced that they are dating this older individual, and this individual who is, at an age where it is illegal. With regard to whatever liaisons that they're having. And that's part of what happens when that person is grooming that very young person. They're convincing them that they're in it. This young person is in it because that's what they want to do. And therefore, when the sexual assaults do happen, then they make that individual feel like they did something wrong, that they are responsible in some way, or that they got in over their heads, when in fact it is a pure manipulation on that part of the individual. It's not dating, it's sexual assault, it's rape, it's pedophile, it's a sexual crime.
We got to go, but 20 seconds. How do we hold someone accountable when there are enablers, including sometimes your parents?
Yeah, absolutely. The important thing is to not take the side of, I don't want to say what's going on. I want to stay neutral. I have my own reasons for, not talking about what's happening. We all have to sound the alarm when we see it, because it can be our own children, God forbid.
Absolutely. Dr. Gardir, a pleasure having you. Thank you for that insight, sir. Now that the prosecution has...
I kept quiet until today.
Denai Ram spent more than a decade inside R. Kelly.
I kept quiet until today.
Denai Ram spent more than a decade inside R. Kelly's world, telling Pix 11 he witnessed it all. International tours, recording studio sessions, and Kelly's interactions with his live-in girlfriends.
I was there. Nobody's chained up. Nobody's locked behind locked doors.
Ram was the opening witness for R. Kelly's defense team, testifying he never saw R. Kelly control his girlfriend.
I observed him taking, them to the movies, out to eat. He would never sit down. He'd always stand up when they walked in.
Ram met R. Kelly when he was an aspiring rapper. R. Kelly became his mentor. Speaking exclusively with Pix 11 after his testimony, Ram said he never witnessed R. Kelly be physically or emotionally abusive.
100% no. Not even close.
But for the last month, the men and women of the jury heard graphic, detailed testimony describing R. Kelly's alleged abuse over decades. From a radio station intern who recalled being locked in a room for days before R. Kelly had sex with her as she was passed out, to former girlfriends who said R. Kelly forced them to have unwanted and at times degrading sex with him and other people.
The point that the prosecutor is trying to bring to the jury is that R. Kelly is a sexual predator, that he used his power, he used his fame in order to engage in sexual intercourse, illegal sexual intercourse with women that are under 18.
R. Kelly pleaded not guilty to the federal racketeering and sex trafficking charges in this case. The defense is expected to call more witnesses Tuesday morning. Legal analyst Bernarda Villalona believes it is unlikely the defense will ask R. Kelly to testify.
Remember, he also has open cases in other jurisdictions. So prior bad acts can come in if he were to testify, because it goes to his credibility, his believability.
Now it's time to talk strategy as the pace of this trial rapidly intensifies. So, of course, I've got veteran prosecutor and BNC's legal contributor, Paul Henderson, here to do just that. All right, Paul, we knew the defense presentation would be shorter than the prosecution's, but did you think they'd wrap up this quickly?
I didn't, and I'm a little surprised at how quickly they're going and moving this along. I'm curious to know what those eliminate motions were restricting both prosecution and defense, just because of how fast the case is going. It really is a surprise to me, and I'm shocked that there aren't more even fake character witnesses that the defense is trying to put on about how normal R. Kelly was, or how nice of a guy he was, to try and counter the many negative testimony evidence that we heard. all of last week and the week before that's preceding their case.
And no experts, too. I'm a little surprised. Today, jurors heard from 2 more former employees of R. Kelly who, like the other witnesses yesterday, said they never witnessed him abuse anyone. One was a sound engineer who's listed on the credits for several R. Kelly songs. Was he credible?
I mean, I think he's credible as to what he may have seen and observed. And as they pointed out, what these witnesses saw and observed was not the whole story. These weren't necessarily witnesses that could have or would have observed what happened behind the closed doors, what happened at night or when he was in those rooms or in those separate houses. The interactions that R. Kelly had with them was under the work context. And that doesn't mean that every context that R. Kelly performed in or appeared in was him engaging in illegal behavior. But what this testimony is limited by is that these witnesses may not have seen information. And it's clear, and this is why prosecution brought it out, that these are witnesses that had a bias or that had a motivation to want R. Kelly to continue being successful because they had a financial investment in his success that was independent on what they knew or may have known if they were looking for it, or knew or were exposed to all of his interactions and all of his operations with the girls. And so what I think is interesting about these 2 witnesses in particular is defense counsel is trying to introduce a narrative that is alternative to the story that we've heard from prosecution about all of the things that have been going on for decades. I just don't know if these 4, 5, 6 witnesses enough to counterbalance the narratives that we know from hearing the testimony from these alleged victims and these other employees that did see things that testified for prosecution. They were employees and they saw things that helped the prosecution's case. And I don't know that this small number or this speedy case that the defense is bringing in is going to be enough to counter that, unless they're relying on an alternative strategy to argue in front of the jury, independent of these employees have testified that it didn't happen. I don't know that that's going to be enough.
Well, under cross-examination, that same witness said that he had signed a confidentiality agreement at one point. Explain how that works in conjunction with him testifying during this trial.
Sure. If he signed a confidentiality agreement, now a lot of that gets raised separately because those speak to the civil limitations that take place. But if R. Kelly enforces that confidentiality or an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement against this person in some capacity, it's separate from these criminal proceedings, and he could be able to recover financially much of, if not all of, the money that was paid to these people. And so that's got to be a consideration for folks that are testifying. And we know from the testimony, both from prosecution and defense, that R. Kelly was very focused on having folks sign these letters that we've heard so much about that deflected, if not obstructed, him being found guilty of committing crimes and or bad behavior. So none of this is a surprise. Quite frankly, the surprise to me is that we haven't seen these letters. The other thing that's in that same category that we've heard a lot about, especially from from prosecution, are these videotapes on iPads. Now, we haven't seen any of these videotapes. We haven't seen any of these letters. To me, it raises the issue of what's been restricted from the eliminate motion, and it raises the issue of whether or not either of the sides is in possession of those videotapes or of those letters, because we haven't seen them so far in this case. And I would imagine that that would be very persuasive, independently of the testimony that we've had that we have to evaluate now. I'd imagine that this jury, I wouldn't be surprised if the jury came back with a question asking about, where are those letters? Can we see them? Where are those videotapes? Do they exist? And not having those questions answered because of how the judge has ruled in the case.
Now, legally, the defense don't have to put on a shred of evidence. We know that. But some would argue that they didn't have a choice. Would they have been better off, the defense that is, not calling any witnesses and arguing that the prosecution simply didn't meet their burden, so there was no need?
I don't think so, because I think juries would be influenced by the long line of victims that they heard and the long line of witnesses that they heard. And remember, these are both men and women, and 6 of them were underage at the time that they were alleging illegal behavior, sexual behavior, where they got STDs, where they were treated badly, where they were treated horribly and had to follow ridiculous rules. I mean, that's a lot for a jury to take in and to dismiss based on legal criteria that they may or may not understand at that stage of the case. What I'm surprised about is that the defense counsel is not putting on experts to talk about the brand of celebrity that I think might help their case about this is how celebrities act. And it's not been illegal. It's not illegal for other celebrities to act in the way that R. Kelly has acted. And people are promiscuous around him because they're groupies and they're fans. And these are just behaviors that people engage in. They're promiscuous and they are liars and they take things from him. That's the kind of expert testimony that I wanted to hear from defense, or that I expected in a case like this, especially if they're not putting on a lot of witnesses. And so it's surprising to me that they're wrapping up their case so quickly, but I still don't think that there is a place left for them to argue other than either the brand of celebrity and or the judgment against groupies and fans that are around R. Kelly. I just don't know if that's going to be enough to overcome the hurdle of judgment associated with inappropriate sexual statutory rape and against the litany of testimony that we've heard from the past few weeks from people talking about how terrible he behaved as it relates to the criminal charges that he's facing for racketeering.
Well, what do you think both the prosecution and the defense will narrow their focus on in closing arguments? I mean, that is coming up in a few days.
Yeah, I don't think they have much of a choice. I think prosecution is really going to focus on the litany of options that the jury has to choose from of illegal behavior that they will argue R. Kelly directed and orchestrated. And I think on the counter to that, the defense counsel is really going to focus on what I just talked about was his brand of celebrity. He didn't know that he was committing an illegal act because he's a celebrity. And if he did commit an illegal act, it was with willing participants. Again, it's going to be on the prosecution to point out to the jury that even if that were true, and even if they were permissive, there are acts that took place that were illegal statutorily that you cannot give consent to. That's the statutory rape. And so I'd expect that to be a learning lesson from the jury, from both defense counsel and from prosecution when it comes time for closing argument. And that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm waiting to hear.
All right, veteran prosecutor and legal contributor Paul Henderson. Now it's time. Respond to the weeks of damning testimony in Kelly's racketeering and sex trafficking trial. And as BNC's Dre Clark tells us, we also got a prediction from the judge that the next phase of this trial will move much more quickly. The judge, Ann Donnelly, suggested that the jurors could begin deliberations as early as Thursday. All right, joining me to talk about today's court activities is veteran prosecutor and BNC's legal contributor, Paul Henderson. Okay, Paul, so after 5 weeks of the prosecution's case in chief, the defense finally get their turn. They put up 2 witnesses today, both of whom worked for Kelly and considered him a friend. Your takeaways from their testimony?
Well, I think they were helpful for the defense, but only to a small degree. And you saw the cross-examination from the witnesses. I think one of the key points here is that the defense wanted to put someone up credible to support R. Kelly. Again, I don't think he's going to take a stand. And it's not a surprise to me that one of their first witnesses was going to be someone from law enforcement or someone with a title that the jury could believe because of their title about what they saw and heard. What I appreciated in watching the witnesses that came up from the defense side was the prosecution undermining the credibility of the witnesses, especially with that police officer. And what I wanted to see was more of them focusing on what those witnesses didn't see, what they didn't know, because I think that would have been important to hear in front of this jury as well. So, for instance, what I wanted to see drawn out more was from that officer talking about the things that he could not have seen or would not have been aware of, things that happened behind closed doors, in those secluded rooms, what was on those iPads that we heard so much about throughout the prosecution's tape that he never saw or heard. I wanted them to focus a little bit on the fact that the witnesses didn't know until years later that R. Kelly had married Aaliyah, as a representation of the fact that these witnesses were not in close contact with him enough to know some of the dealings that he did in private that he didn't want the public to know or the people around him to know while he was engaged in bad behavior. So it's a good start, I guess, for the defense in terms of, I see where they're trying to go, but I'm curious to see what other witnesses they're going to put on, even though the judge has indicated that their case will be much shorter than what the prosecution had.
Yeah, that Aaliyah angle is actually a really good point you just made. Well, Paul, let's talk more about what these defense witnesses said. You kind of touched on a few. Larry Hood, the former Chicago police officer, said he worked security for Kelly and never witnessed any abuse. The second witness, a musician named Denai, said he worked for Kelly for 15 years off and on and never saw him have sex with underage girls, even called him chivalrous towards the women in his life. We knew that the defense were going to put up witnesses who would challenge the accounts given by Kelly's accusers, but just because these two didn't witness anything criminal happen doesn't mean it didn't happen. Will the jury see it that way?
I think the prosecution's job is going to be to make that argument to make sure that they see it that way, so that they understand that while these witnesses can come in, and let's make this clear, I think these witnesses are more character witnesses than anything else. They're trying to find people to rehabilitate the character of R. Kelly that will give him some credibility with this audience. Again, it's because I don't think he's going to be able to take the stand. And so they want to put on as many people as possible to talk about how good-natured R. Kelly was, how chivalrous he was, how nice he was, generous he was with people. But that doesn't close the door to the behavior that prosecution is going to have to focus on. Now, I think the defense team is really going to try to have to put on some women, or as many women as they can, to testify about gender and to testify about how nice and pleasant R. Kelly was, and to really try and dirty up some of the victims that we've heard from. Because let's keep in mind, 11 of the alleged victims from the prosecution, of those, 6 of them were underage. And so they're really going to need to try and rehabilitate a lot of that damning evidence that we've heard from prosecution. And I'd expect to see a lot of women talking about what a nice person R. Kelly is and how they weren't there anything as far as what on himself. But like I said at the beginning, I don't think that closes the door. And that's what prosecutors have to focus on, what was likely happening aside from what these witnesses may be testifying to on behalf of R. Kelly that were also receiving benefits from R. Kelly while they were working with him or around him during all of these years.
So you said character witnesses who could possibly rehabilitate Kelly, but that became problematic because the character of one of these witnesses was actually questioned. Hood, that is, also claimed that as an officer, if women were being locked away, he would have acted, right, as a police officer. But the prosecution took a shot at his credibility on cross-examination. They noted that he had pled guilty under oath in a previous forgery case, which forced him to leave the police department. But today, he claimed on the witness stand and under oath again that he was innocent. He opened the door wide open for the prosecution to basically imply that he was either lying then or he's lying under oath now. So will this work to disqualify his testimony for the jury?
Well, I think that's where prosecution has to go. That's what you would do. That's what I would do. I can't imagine that prosecution isn't going to do that to undermine his own character because he made it an issue by how he testified. And I think that that's going to undermine what they're trying to do by having him on the stand as a police officer. I think the bigger issue, though, is having prosecution outline that he wasn't there 24 hours a day. He was only there while R. Kelly was paying him to be there and doing what R. Kelly wanted him to do. And if R. Kelly was doing things that he didn't want this police officer on his payroll to see or be aware of, he just wouldn't have had him around. And he was not in the room with all of these many women that had testified that they were there and on location at one of the three houses participating in various nefarious acts that officer might not have been aware of. That's going to be prosecution's role to outline, and it's going to start with them undermining his very credibility based on the testimony that he gave about himself, which he called into question by saying that he was actually innocent when the records prove with him otherwise.
All right, so the defense presented a witness list, Paul, with only about a half dozen people on it compared to the 45 witnesses from the prosecution. What does that actually say about their case or their strategy? I mean, more doesn't necessarily mean better, does it?
It doesn't necessarily. And I think in a case like this, they're going to have targeted witnesses that undermine factual narratives from the witnesses that were presented by the prosecution. Because keep in mind, some of the prosecution challenges in a case like this, especially with RICO challenges, these actions go back decades. So that's the first issue. We're talking about instances and circumstances that aren't recent. They could go back a very long time. And then the secondary issue is overcoming the qualification or the judgment about the witnesses that testified and the alleged victims that could be considered as fans and were engaged in complicit behavior, but presenting their testimony in a way that characterizes them and qualifies them as victims to shine the light back on the behavior of R. Kelly. And so the witnesses for the defense can undermine those 2 points to really try and make a case that those details weren't actually accurate and the people that were testifying were complicit. They received benefits. They aren't necessarily telling the truth. Again, the hard line here that I want prosecution to focus on for this case is for those victims that were underage, and of the 11 that alleged that they were victims, 6 of them were allegedly underage as well. That's the key point. That statutory rape clause really is going to be hard to overcome because the jury has to only believe 1 or 2 of them to get to the racketeering conviction.
All right, veteran prosecutor and legal contributor Paul Henderson. Thank
So far, 4 people have testified for the defense. And for me, it doesn't look too good for R. Kelly. According to my opinion, I think that they have proven an enterprise. I think that they have proven the Mann Act and sexual abuse and how R. Kelly's controlling and how everyone falls under R. Kelly's umbrella. And it's crazy because as we could see here, this was one of the exhibits that was shown today about R. Kelly's operation. According to one of the reporters, this was exhibit 1103, and it shows a demonstration of a layout that they had placed as to RSK Enterprise LLC. And as you can see at the top, it says CEO Robert S. Kelly, And then on the other side to your right, it says Julius Darrington, which is known as the AR, the A&R. Then underneath that, we have accounting, which is EMCI LLC and Lisa Sullivan. Also, underneath that, we have Erica Sellers, which is the PR, and Sherry Zoll. And then underneath that, you have Robert D. Smith handling social media with June Brown. Then you have Donald Lyles, aka Donnie. Then you have Ian Murness, and he's an engineer. Also, engineers work as security officers as well. And then they have the production team, which is Sante Shannon. And then above that, you have James Mason as the manager. And then above that, you have John Holder, who is the accountant. Now, we know Mason got locked up for allegedly threatening the Savages. I don't know what happened with that case. I know Mason was out on bail for a while. And so this is the operation according to RSK Enterprise. This is how their operation ran. Now, if you look at this here on the screen, I don't know if you can see it too well. I know it's a little blurry, guys. I apologize about that, but it's something that I grabbed off the internet. It's the best I could find. According to an enterprise, they usually have the boss, right, which would be the CEO. Then they have the bookmaker and the advisor, right? According to what we know, would be Daryl McDavid in the past and June Brown, right? Then you have your captains underneath. Then underneath your captains, you have your warriors. Underneath your warriors, you have the enforcers, the contract killers, the bodyguards. Things of that nature. That's how the RICO is supposed to be, according to an enterprise and how it runs. So, this over here is a hot mess. This over here is an octopus. That's so weird how they would use a giant squid or an octopus to demonstrate their enterprise and how it runs. Weird, right? I just find that totally odd. You know, an octopus has tentacles, they stick to you, they suck you up, right? They eat you whole. It's crazy. It's just weird how they would use this animal to demonstrate their enterprise and how they run. It's so weird. I thought it would be like this. Instead, it's like this. That's bananas. So, I have a little treat for you guys. I found this on my Twitter feed. And I thought it was hilarious, guys. Wait till you see this. Okay. I don't know if you guys could see my Twitter page. But I'm going to go on mute. This is a Twitter feed. Wait, before I made it large, this was a Twitter feed from Inner City Press, and this was put out on August 22nd. But I just saw it, and I think it was funny. It's a song dedicated to Judge Ann Donnelly, and the name of the song is hashtag R. Kelly, No Press Jury Trial Blues by Matthew Russell Lee. And in the contents of the songs, it says Judge Donnelly said, no call in line, that a no press courtroom's fine. Dr. McGrath says, got no money. You do the math. The doctor patient privilege is past. He went to the concerts and had a blast. So I'm going to play the song for you guys. I'm about to go on mute.
Judge Donnelly said no press in the courtroom. Judge Donnelly said no call in line. Judge Donnelly said don't tweet about Rico. Judge Donnelly said a secret file can be just fine. Now on the stand is the good Dr. McGrath. Says he took no money, you do the math. The doctor-patient privilege is a thing of the past. He went to all the concerts and he had a blast. Anthony Navarro said it was like the Twilight Zone. He would make the appointments using his cell phone. Says he does more normal work for Taylor Swift. His time on the stand in Brooklyn, for him it's a gift. Oh, Judge Donnelly said no press in the courtroom. Judge Donnelly said no call in line. Judge Donnelly said don't tweet about Rico. Judge Donnelly said a secret trial can keep us fine, but is it?
I think that was hilarious. Judge Donnelly, what are you doing, Judge Donnelly? I tell you, it was, so I just thought that was funny. And what do you guys think about my little new channel art? I'm trying to do some new things here, guys. Okay. gotta share this. Hold on. How do I do that? Share. Okay. Okay. Let me make sure my window, I'm sharing my window. Okay, guys. Okay. All right. All right. Here is a short little interview with Jim DeRogatis, and he's giving his opinion on what has been happening in the R. Kelly trial. So let's listen. Oh, let me make sure. Hold on. Sorry about the guys. Yeah, see, okay. I have to. Okay. Okay, I'm going on mute now. So you can charge one person under a RICO, like The Godfather. Just an example. Just an example. Now, it's saying that the defense opened up with excuses and missing witnesses. It said that the prosecution rested in the case against R. Kelly on Monday, and it had presented a formidable body of evidence against the disgraced singer. Okay. We know that a woman testified that R. Kelly trapped her in the studio and raped her. A former backup singer said she saw the performer perform oral sex on an underage Aaliyah. Another man said he had been abused by Kelly when he was 17. And the prosecution presented more than 40 witnesses in total, including 11 victims of alleged abuse, 6 of whom claimed they were underage at the time of the abuse. And Kelly, who's facing racketeering, sexual exploitation of a child, kidnapping, and among other things. We know that he's denied all the allegations. The prosecution started the morning by complaining that the defense had scrapped a list of likely Monday witnesses at the last minute on Sunday evening, causing Judge Donnelly to chide Kelly's legal team. It disappoints me that you waited so long to furnish a list of names, Judge Donnelly said. Instead, the defense said it would call in 3 new witnesses, giving no indication that Kelly would take the stand at any point. But even that effort fell short. Then after lunch break on Monday, the defense team noted that the third witness was not in town, and they were still in process of diligently searching for funds to bring that person to New York. So according to the defense team, they can't afford to bring in some people, huh? They can't afford to bring anybody in, huh? You can't fly them JetBlue or something like that? Pay for a cheap hotel out there in Brooklyn? You could find one. Yeah, you could find one. And the defense primary strategy, to the extent it can be determined from interrogating just 2 witnesses, revolved around calling for testimony from any of Kelly's former collaborators or employees who can vouch for the singer's behavior as above board, even gentlemanly. And the 2 defense witnesses on Monday both said they had known Kelly for more than a decade and that they had never seen the singer commit any litany of accused abuses, from locking women in bedrooms to denying them food or hitting them during the time that they worked there. And since these men insisted that they hadn't observed any abuse, the prosecution worked to show how limited their sight lines were, how many moments they might not have been with Kelly in the studio, on the tour bus, or back at one of his residences. So this was part of a larger effort to undermine the trustworthiness of the witnesses, and that prosecutors tried to paint one as a criminal and the other as someone whose career was dependent on the singer's support. Yeah, so the first witness, who was an aspiring artist named Dani Ramanan, aka Dotney, who met Kelly at an Albuquerque mall in the mid 2000s. And he said that he worked with him on and off for more than 15 years. And that he described the singer as a mentor to him and a good friend. Responding to questions, he said that Kelly always opened doors for women and stood up for them when they entered the room. Danny also noted that R. Kelly's girlfriends acted just like the rest of us. And when they went to restaurants in large groups, the woman would get to sit down first, order first, eat first. And a situation he likened to chivalry, basically. Chivalry. 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 I can never say that word. The second witness went back even further with R. Kelly, Larry Hood, and he was a former bodyguard and a member of the Chicago Police Department. And he said that he knew R. Kelly back from grammar school, but had worked with him over a short period of time. He provided security for Kelly in the first half of the 90s and was present when the singer first met Aaliyah in Detroit. And that he later on returned for a second tour from 2002 to 2004, at which point he said he was informed that Kelly could no longer afford to keep him on the payroll. Yeah, that's because he was paying all them lawyers at 2002, 2004. Now, the officer, the ex-officer Hood, he said that Hood was more laconic. What the heck just happened here? Hold on. Commercial just popped up out on me. What the hell? Okay. All right. So, the guy Hood was more laconic than Rahman, and perhaps slightly more authoritative. So not only did the former bodyguard say that he had never witnessed Kelly committing any inappropriate behavior, but he said that his job as a policeman would have compelled him to act if he had seen anything abusive take place. And then that guy Danny, he spoke in the vague, general, terms, and that he favored R. Kelly's music, and he favored R. Kelly. And not on one, but on two distinct occasions, he described his job with Kelly as to observe and learn and to become. Wow, what does that sound like? That sounds like something Azriel said, right? To act innocent, act like a mother, right? Things of this nature. What happened here? What, hello? Oh, I apologize about that. I think I lost my service there for a moment, guys. Sorry about that. So now they were saying, so his job with R. Kelly was to observe and learn and to become. And what did this guy observe and learn and become? Because I don't hear any rap music from this guy. I don't Never heard of this guy before ever in my life. What did R. Kelly teach him to observe and learn and to become? Inquiring minds want to know. I need to know, Danny. What exactly did you have to observe and learn and to become? Now, when he said that, um, it made him vulnerable to cross examination. Now, Danny said that he met R. Kelly at a mall in Albuquerque. That's New Mexico, right? So it must have been when he had his concert in New Mexico. Now, Danny said that he don't remember the year, but that he toured with him, but couldn't remember the names of any of the tours. And he worked with R. Kelly in the studio, but the music never came out. And the defense wound up asking the judge to play some of Danny's music in the courtroom. Um, and Auntie Ann was not having that. She's like, D9, what are we doing? No, we are not going to listen to any more music. No, this is not the Boondocks edition. Okay. And Danny, he was kind of consistently fuzzy when it came to recalling specific details. And that made it relatively easy for the prosecution to shoot holes in his testimony. And that when the witness maintained he was always with Kelly on the road. He was always with R. Kelly on the road. And that the prosecution presented 3 different photos of the singer with women on a tour bus and asked Danny to find himself in the picture. And each time he was not present. So was Danny with R. Kelly every second in the studio? Now, the aspiring artist, as we know, Danny, right? The aspiring artist, I think I'm losing my service. The aspiring artist allowed that he had to go use the bathroom. He said, I assume you slept, the prosecution added. Now, the prosecution also worked to show that Danny's aspirations for commercial success as an artist under R. Kelly's wing made him dependent on curing the singer's favor for years. And they wound up asking repeatedly, did you want to stay on his good side? And that on the officer on Hood's cross-examination, his moved more faster. And it hinged on the revelation by the prosecution that the former cop, he now sells cars. He had a felony forgery conviction. And just as the guy Hood claimed, he was unaware of R. Kelly's marriage with Aaliyah when she was underage. And that he also claimed he was unaware that he was throwing around counterfeit $100 bills in 2007. So the prosecution left this point for the end of the cross-examination, but slammed it home, making sure the jury knew that Hood pleaded guilty to the felony charge, even as he testified in court on Monday that he did not know the money was fake. And then after that, R. Kelly's defense team announced that its third witness was still in the wind and that the defense's first day ended much as it started. So they said, we again request a list of the witnesses the defense is going to call for tomorrow on Wednesday. And the prosecution said that Judge Donnelly appeared surprised So the prosecution said that we again request a list of the witnesses the defense is going to call for tomorrow and Wednesday. And Judge Donnelly appeared surprised that this list was still forthcoming. Turning to the defense, she asked, haven't we already settled that? Like, don't we already know who's coming for this guy? Like, we already know what's going on. There should be nothing more, nothing less. Let's see here. Then it talks, says that, okay. All right, that is that. Let's see. Okay. So this article from Vulture tells us a lot more. This came out yesterday from Victoria Beckimeps. That's the girl Victoria I follow on Twitter. She works for the, I believe, BuzzFeed and the New York Times or Vulture. She works for these places, these news reports, outlets. So let's see. But you know what? I think I'm gonna read this tomorrow. I'm gonna leave this up. I'm gonna end this live because I don't want to keep running more, guys. So I'm going to end this. Please make sure you hit the like button. Thank you very much. And make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. And hit that notification bell as well. Put it on all. And if you have any comments, please leave the comments below in the comments section of the video. Thank you. And have a wonderful, wonderful day. Peace.